Hello, I'm David Goldsmith and welcome to the Goldsmith Institute. Today we're going to be talking about advanced strategizing, and I'm going to give you some simple guidance on how you can make small changes to create very large returns. Let's begin by saying that there are two different points I'd like to bring up. The first is the majority of leaders think about what when it comes to strategizing and not that much about how they are thinking so that they can improve their strategizing approaches. Number two is there's a lack of consistent language throughout the entire developing plans and strategizing. Let's begin by just having you take 1 second to think about your definition or your approach to strategizing. I'm betting you use two specific words when you are thinking about strategizing. The first is strategy, and the second one is tactics. Those are very common, and we use them all the time throughout business and organizations, large, small, profit, nonprofit, government, military, and education. So these words aren't foreign. But I can tell you that the definitions of these words are as foreign as they can be. Let me tell you that throughout the world I've asked the question, what is strategy and what is tactics? Let me give you a few of those answers to show you how alarming this discussion can be if you aren't all on the same page. For example, strategizing for some people, and this is just a small sampling, could be an idea. It could be a vision. It could be a plan. It could be direction. Things to be done. It could be a goal, a roadmap, a mission, or even a complete plan. Already you're saying some of these don't fit the way you would see probably the word strategy. So let's take the word tactics. I'm assuming you already have what your definition is mine, but these are some that have been given to me. A plan, things to do. Blocking and tackling is one that I thought is very interesting. Tools, vehicles, techniques, an action plan, and on and on. Now realize this is a very small sampling, but I've actually had people define blocking and tackling as strategy, and I've had people talk about a complete plan down here. I've had people talk about goals and crossing over so much that at times I'm so confused what people are saying. So let me share with you what the problem is or the challenge that happens with this. There's a confusion between people when you're talking about what to be done. You might be sitting in a strategic planning session and one person's talking one language and another's talking another. That can give misdirection. You can even have confusion as the outcomes, because if you're planning on delivering one set of components to your strategizing and another person has different components, there can be confusion as to what's supposed to be delivered. And then there's also the confusion of the assets that are involved. How are you going to use them intelligently if no one's speaking the same language? So what I'd like to do is give you an approach that will help you tremendously when working with other people and strategizing. The first is we have to create one language with some clarity so that everybody's on the same page. This will increase the connection so that people are getting to a better strategy faster. It'll assist in breaking down silos. And it'll be useful in any type of strategizing, groups, large organizations, small organizations. So you could be a one-man person or one individual person and you can improve your strategizing. You could be an ad hoc committee. An ad hoc committee could be, for example, you're just putting on a wedding or you're putting on a PTA event. Having the same language would be extremely helpful. You could also be in an organization that's fairly large. You could be 3, 4 levels down and you're in a subgroup. And this could be useful. And it also could be useful just, for example, on the executive team if you're working together. Being able to share from the board of directors to you a common language that helps your group or your organization move forward. Besides that, you're not going to be wasting time on the misconceptions of what people are thinking about. By having one language, you'll achieve more options. And this is universal. What you're going to be seeing is a universal tool that can be used across the entire spectrum of business, and I call them the 7 crosses. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it could be at any level within an organization, frontline management, frontline all the way to senior management. It could be in different areas of the organization. It could be engineering, HR, logistics, whatever department you are working in IT. It also can be for small businesses, large businesses, government, profit, nonprofit, military, education. There's 7 of them, but it can work in any different area just as effectively as it would in one area. What I'd like to introduce to you right now is what I call the Cyclonic Strategic Thinking model. Let's begin with the strategy and tactics that you're familiar with, we just spoke about. But what I'm going to do is expand this out a little bit more for you so that you have a better understanding of the deliverables required of you when you're doing strategic thinking. Let's start with what we're labeling, or I'm labeling, the desired outcome. Now, why have we labeled this desired outcome? It's because vision, mission, goals, objectives, all the words that are being used to describe what's necessary to be done by a group or an organization is very unclear. Very few people are able to accurately produce a vision or a mission. Besides that, if you put on a small party or an event, or you're working in an ad hoc committee, you don't sit down and create a vision, mission, and goals. In strategizing, though, it should be universal in approach, and this way, if we have desired outcome, it works for everybody. The second thing is strategy, and strategy is where you're going. In broad terms, it's where you're going. It's a big picture. The next one is called macro tactics. Macro tactics. Now, what are macro tactics? You know, when you're trying to think about macro tactics are the big picture tactics without the details of what's going to be going on. And I'll give you an example a little bit later on, but that enables you to identify the tactic you're going to be used that has to be expanded out and then created in your tactical plans. And that's the tactics. It's something that can be passed on to people for those who are then the people who are the executors. And, you know, it's funny, I very seldom hear strategy, tactics, and execution. It's normally strategy and tactics. And the number of people who believe execution is part of tactics or even part of strategy is beyond belief. So by breaking it out into these 5 steps, we're giving you some clarity. Besides that, there's something even bigger here. Because there's these components, I can tell you that this is what you're paid to think about. These are the key areas that your job is when you're in leadership, is to think about what the strategy is, all the way down to detailed enough tactics so that it works when someone does it. Now, throughout this, the reason it's called cyclonic is this. Strategy doesn't work where you just go down the aisle and you end up with whatever you'd like. It's an ongoing thinking process, and I call it the cyclonic strategic thinking because in cyclonic, and here's the model, cyclonic, we have information going in, thoughts going in, data and lessons, all sorts of information going in, and then we're discarding what information doesn't work, just like a cyclone. It picks things up and tosses it out the other side until you can come up with the point where you say, I'm ready to shoot, I'm ready to go. Now, in each one of these levels, you'll have micro strategizing, but you know what I'm talking about. It's when you're sitting in the car thinking about how to solve something, or you're waking up in the morning or can't get to sleep. It's while you're at your desk, you're trying to figure out how to solve a challenge that you have. And this is what you're actually delivering. You have to deliver or identify your desired outcome. You have to figure out what your strategy is. You have to figure out what your macro tactics are and then define them in a tactical form so that when you pass them on to people who are in the execution mode or executors of your tactics, they're capable of following it. The analogy that I would use is if you are making tactics for baking a cake or cooking, you would give different types of levels of information for a beginner and a chef. And tactics have to meet the people where their level of expertise is. Now, throughout the process, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be working on your desired outcome, strategy, tactics several times, often going up and down this path. Continually go up and down. You're, in essence, working in a virtual world. And you're creating simulations to define how you're going to be able to achieve the desired outcome that you're looking for. So let me give you something to think about here. An excellent strategy An excellent strategy poorly executed is better than a poor strategy executed well. Now you sit down and you do your strategic thinking and you're in Chicago, United States, and you plan on going to Bogota for whatever desired outcome that is, and you sit down and you make some plans up, and the plans are excellent strategy, so you've got excellent strategy but poorly executed. You end up, the person gets in their vehicle or their train and they start going south and they start going south and they run out of fuel or money and they're 700 miles south of Chicago. That's much better than a poor strategy executed well. Guy gets into his vehicle, he heads north because the strategy is poor, but he can follow it completely, and he ends up 400 miles north by the time he's done. I'd rather have the poor strategy executed, the excellent strategy executed poorly than the poor strategy executed well. So what we're talking about in strategizing is the economics of thinking, which I've described at another time, is that with time being on a variable and cost being a variable, it becomes more and more expensive as you move down the timeline to create strategy. So the more you can think about something, the more you can plan something out in your head before you bring others into the fold, the cheaper it will be. Because once you launch, it's extremely expensive. It could be market expense, it could be media expense, it could be employees leaving the organization. Let me give you an example, or a few examples to help you with this. The National Transportation and Safety Board in the U.S. had an original strategy of decreasing vehicular death and injury. Now, they're making the assumption right there that it's inevitable, that they put in airbags to be able to improve what they're doing. But just recently, they had a shift in strategy. They decided that prevention was more their directive, and what they ended up by saying, this prevention, is it is preventable. And by doing so, what they could have done years and years ago was worked on side collision systems or roads that did not allow someone to fall off of it or slide off of it, instead of working on the after effect that there was an accident. The shift in strategy is huge, and it makes a huge difference in your organization. If you come up with the right strategy first, you can work stronger and more effectively. So let me give you an example of how this might play out in terms of a personal example. It's not a business example, it's personal, because you probably will be able to identify this a little bit stronger. Let's say next year you're given the opportunity to have a week off. Around the globe, there's a term for it. It's either holiday or vacation. But just by labeling it holiday or vacation, what you've already done is you've defined, if you say vacation, you've already defined the strategy. The reason being is you have many options when it comes to time off. For example, your desired outcome could be fun for the family. It could be earn additional money and work. It could be to spend time with relatives. It could be to work on the book that you're working on, or to get away from everybody. So by jumping to vacation, we're already making some assumptions that would fit into the strategy section and non-desired outcome. So let's assume that you sat down and you said, I have this week off and I'd like to have a fun family event. And the determination is the way to have fun family for you is to go on a vacation that would involve going to hotels and staying someplace far away. Now, that vacation for you is different than somebody else. But by determining you're going on a vacation, you can then start thinking about the macro tactics. Macro tactics could be, do I want to go by plane, by boat? Do I want to go to Europe? Do I want to go on a family outing and just go into the wilderness for a week? All of those determine or are macro tactics. If you say you're going to go to Europe, or you're going to go tenting, you're going to stay in a 3-star resort, or you're going to go by boat across the Atlantic or the Pacific, whichever direction you'd like to go. See them as macro tactics. They really don't tell you what you're doing. There's no details. No one can follow them. But what we confuse tactics with are these macro tactics. It's actually the selection of which direction you want to go in. Once you've thought about it for a while, and this could be an extended period of time, you then can develop the tactics, which is the plan that someone can follow. Now, if the plan is detailed enough so that you can execute on it. So let me give you an example of when I was growing up. My father, we would decide on this week off that we were going to go on a fun family vacation. For example, we would be going on the vacation, we would be going skiing. Skiing in Vermont, and for 1 week, and we'd stay at instead of a hotel, we might stay at a rental house. We might rent a house out. Those little specifics gave us enough to know what we've got to research now. If we were going to stay in a rental place, we'd start calling up the type of rental locations we'd be looking at. And then what my father would do is he would take out a map. For some of you not old enough, you have GPS. We would have a piece of paper. My father would draw in a yellow highlighter the map we're going to take. And he wouldn't put the speed. He wouldn't put the direction in terms of you got to face this way and that way. He wouldn't tell us what we had to put in the car, but he'd give us enough details so whoever was executing, whoever was driving that car, they could follow it. They'd know where we had to stop potentially, and they know how, the direction to get there. Those are plans designed for someone willing to execute. Now the key is, we took that map with us. And if you develop great plans, those plans typically sit on your desktop, and you want them because they're so good that they're going to help you get to your destination. You don't leave without your map. You don't go on vacation without all of the details because you're hoping that you get a better experience by using those tools. Now, in a business environment, you might say my desired outcome is growth, and for example, 10% growth, and you're going to expand into Asia, and you're going to do that by alliances, and you're going to define how those alliances would be set up and who you might work with or what types of organizations you'd work with. Then once you figure out those details, you would execute on them. So it happens all the time. It's very consistent, and you can do this for any type of organization. It helps to give you a deliverable that you have to be working on. Let me give you a few examples. Famous book out there, I'm not going to mention the name, G to G book, and this organization out of Germany had decided they were going to take their executives in the U.S. They did about $300 million in revenue. They were going to take 12 of them every month and bring them together to start talking about where they're going. Well, they were so confused about what the book was delivering because there was no model for them to follow that they were all over the place all day long. And two things happened. Number one, and they planned on 12 meetings throughout the year. Number one is that the confusion made it for a very irritating experience. People were not happy with going on. But secondly, at the end of the day, which was the surprise to me, one of the CFOs stood up and said, I hate sitting around and talking. When are we going to actually do something? He wanted to move to execution. He wanted to move to developing the tactics without spending the time to think. And there's a lot of cyclonic thinking that goes on when you're in leadership. The next one is a bank in Texas. Bank in Texas decided very quickly, management, that they were going to reach the 24 to 34-year-olds, which was a great objective to meet. And that's their strategy, to reach this certain direct group. But then what they did is they came up with the solution that they were going to build a branch near 15,000 homes. But yet he was dealing with the 25 to 34-year-olds, and they had a very poor online experience. Now, if you're 25 to 34-year-old today, you're going to want an online banking solution. And instead of looking and doing their research and spending the time figuring out what their tactics, their macro tactics would be that would hit the desired outcome, they jumped to the conclusion, move right to tactics, and end right to building. Harper Productions, or Oprah Winfrey, had a show in 2008 called Oprah's Big Give. She gave $100,000 to individuals, and in 24 hours they had to give as much away as possible. They were all given the same tools, cash, car, phone, and rules, and they were set out on their own. Now, what was interesting, the average giveaway was about $60,000. Not a bad giveaway. But in this one show that I was watching, I saw this woman. She was given the same amount as everybody else. She gave away $3,000. She immediately was given the money, and she hopped in her car, and she started driving around trying to figure out how to give it away. And she came up with very, very poor tactics, but jumped right to execution, trying to give the money away as fast as possible. This other individual spent a little bit more time trying to figure out how he could give away the money the fastest and the most efficiently. And he actually was able to give away the complete $100,000. Same tools, same position, but better thinking. A few thoughts before I end. Good cyclonic strategic thinking is detailed and specific enough, but also includes the who will perform the tasks, when these things should be happening, and the accountabilities within them. Along with, remember, that chef or that cook given the right amount of details for the right person, not giving too much, not giving too little. And that's the sign of a good leader who is able to identify what they are. Good strategy and tactics, or the cyclonic strategic thinking, also involve understanding interdependencies, how task X and task Y are connected. And there's a chronology that happens when you're working in this environment. So you're going to be looking at defining your customers, your vendors, your groups, your members, the consultants, the media, everybody involved, so that you can make sure that whatever you pass on works. What often happens in tactics is someone doesn't think it through well enough so that when it actually is put into play, things go wrong, and that's where you generate fires. The last one is allow for flexibility. Even in the military, they understand, they do a lot of strategizing because human life is in limbo. Whenever they're creating a strategy, they know that the opponent is going to do something else. So they try to build in enough flexibility so that if in fact someone has to think on the fly or move, they're still able to achieve the desired outcome. Now in this video, I'm not going to spend the time on execution. Just realize there's execution on the front line, there's execution in management, there's execution throughout, and that will be a completely different video that would deliver. Now when you look at your plans that you have, do you have them in front of you? Do you have them on the seat next to you as you're driving? I know a person who's developed great strategies typically keeps them in front of them. They have them with them all the time, not on a shelf, not on a bookshelf behind them or on a shelf on the side. They put them out in front. And organizations that are very good at strategizing have teams of people constantly looking to make sure they're doing the right thing. So that's the short summary. Look, I wanted to give you all the details you needed to be able to have a better view of what advanced strategizing is about. You can always check me out at david@davidgoldsmith.com. If you're interested in coaching, I do coaching with people all over the world. You could also check out the Goldsmith Institute. And then there's consulting from the stage for those of you who are looking for somebody to be able to deliver to your organization some great advice on how to move forward. You can reach me at david@davidgoldsmith.com. Call me at 315-682-3157.